She was ordered to wait outside the mission room, badge clipped, headset powered off, her name left off the flight roster without explanation. No one raised their voice. No one gave a reason. The conversation moved on without her, as if she had never been there at all. For the next 30 minutes, she stood in silence while the screens glowed inside and the aircrew finalized their plan. And then everything changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But one voice, from someone no one expected, asked a single question. And suddenly, the room turned. The absence was noticed. The mistake, quietly corrected. And what followed was a mission that would never have launched without her. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The heat rolled across the carrier deck in shimmering waves, distorting the sharp edges of painted jet tails and blurring the horizon into a silver haze. 4 nations' aircraft stood in formation along the bow, gleaming under the hard sun. Sailors moved in orchestrated bursts, guiding tractors and scanning clipboards while catapults steamed through their test cycle. Voices crackled over radios. Laughter broke out near the bow catwalk. Cameras snapped every few seconds. It was the last day of the exercise, and the ship had the energy of a stage wrapping up a high-budget production. Elise stood off-center from it all, her back to the rail and her gloves looped through her belt. Her flight suit, faded slightly at the knees, clung stiff in the heat. She carried her logbook in one hand, its spine wrapped in clear tape, corners dog-eared from use. The notebook held entries going back months. She logged drift corrections, passive scan variances, and pulse anomalies others never bothered to review. No one asked for it. No one looked through it. Still, she brought it to every mission. The E-2D Hawkeye she had flown aboard sat quiet on Spot 7, its rotodome casting a slow-moving shadow across the deck. Unlike the fighters, it attracted no photos. No one posed beside it. Its value was in silence, in the gaps it filled before anyone else knew they were gaps. Elise had helped guide 4 successful sorties that week, providing early radar locks and mid-flight route adjustments. She had not been thanked once. That wasn't unusual. Near the comms hut, a group of flight controllers leaned against the bulkhead, sleeves rolled, boots scuffed. One of them glanced toward her and smirked. "Lantern's still scanning the horizon for ghosts," he said. "Bet she logged a seagull again." There were a few chuckles. One mimed a pair of binoculars. Another mockingly tapped a phantom keyboard in the air. None of them looked directly at her. They didn't have to. She was used to it. Elise said nothing. She closed the last sensor hatch on the Hawkeye, checked the latch twice, then moved toward the deck console to input her final sortie annotation. The screen barely responded in the glare. She shielded it with her hand, typed without hesitating, and uploaded the post-mission drift overlay. Her note included a soft ping logged northwest of the grid, just off the known shipping lane. It was faint. Likely nothing. Still, she recorded it. Inside the ready room, the walls buzzed with footage from fighter gun cams and wing cameras. Pilots stood in groups, retelling turns with outstretched hands and voices too loud for the space. Elise stepped past them toward the data terminal, her logbook balanced on her forearm. The mission highlights had no mention of the Hawkeye. That wasn't unusual either. A senior pilot from the Canadian crew looked over as she passed. He didn't lower his voice. "There she is. Lantern, logging heat shimmer as hostile intent again," he said. His wingman added, "At least it'll be categorized alphabetically." The group laughed. The sound was casual, unforced, familiar. That made it worse. Elise keyed in her access ID, scanned the latest radar file, and set the terminal to archive mode. She moved precisely, each step part of a sequence she had internalized long ago. She never rushed. She never lingered. She didn't ask for space. She created it by not reacting. The logbook pages flipped softly in the printer's fan draft. She caught a loose corner and held it steady until the transfer completed. Once the upload finished, she removed the book, tucked it under her arm, and turned away. Back through the outer corridor, the ship's noise dropped to a background hum. Here, the bulkheads were cooler. No one lingered. Elise moved past the security post and into the auxiliary planning room. This was the space no one filmed. It smelled faintly of metal polish and old paper. She sat near the far end of the long table and placed the logbook in front of her. She opened it to the last entry, where the soft ping had been marked in red pencil and circled twice. The official system hadn't flagged it. No alert had gone off. To anyone else, it was a low confidence artifact. But she had seen a shape, an echo, a signature that did not belong. Someone had said it earlier that day. She could still hear it. Just a flare. No one had asked her to check twice. No one had told her not to, either. The ship's speaker system clicked once overhead. A muffled announcement rolled out. Deck crew were being called to shift positions for the closing ceremony. Foreign officers were assembling for photos. Fighter squadrons were prepping for formation flyovers. The Hawkeye, with its canopy closed and engines cool, had already been moved into standby. Elise closed her book. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the cover for a moment. Then she stood, looped her gloves through her belt again, and walked toward the stairs without a word. The Hawkeye interior held a stillness that came only after flight. Fans hummed low inside the metal frame, cooling systems slowly winding down, their rhythm steady beneath the occasional groan of expanding panels. The flight deck outside had gone noisy with ceremony. But in here, everything was narrow and quiet. Screens glowed softly across the ops panel, bathing the cabin in a dull blue tint. Elise sat at her station alone, her headset unplugged, gloves resting in the side mesh pocket. Her boots were still damp from the wash rack. She initiated the final sweep alignment protocol, watching the diagnostic window scroll. The system traced calibration markers across the quadrant display, checking for alignment drift, pulse decay, and environmental noise. Most operators let this run without watching counter. Elise didn't. Her eyes tracked the sequence. On the third pass, something flickered in Zone 7. It wasn't a strong return, just a blip. 1 pixel, blinking against a mostly clean sweep. She paused the loop, dialed back 2 frames, and watched again. The signal was weak, but it carried a specific signature analog heat bloom, elongated pulse decay, irregular wavelength. Not digital, not coded. It looked like flare energy. Manual. Elise leaned forward, adjusted the gain, and ran a secondary scan at low resolution. Nothing came back. The return had vanished. She sat still for a few seconds, listening to the ship creak faintly around her. Then she flagged the anomaly and entered a note. Possible low-output thermal contact. Non-identified. Vector southwest. She tagged it with the time and weather state, then saved it to her own log. It wasn't enough to escalate, but it wasn't nothing. She opened a comm line to her shift supervisor, who was 2 compartments over setting up a mission highlight reel for the next morning's brass tour. His voice came through layered in static and background chatter. When she explained what she'd seen, he didn't hesitate. Training artifact, he said. Heat from the old flare chute or residual glow off the wave markers. Happens all the time this late. She clarified that the signal profile didn't match any logged SIM asset. He pushed back, told her the signal was likely a bounce or a false echo off the bay wall. One of the deck teams had reported an expired flare casing found near the arrestor net that morning. He reminded her the exercise was closed. The radar suite was in cleanup mode. There was nothing to confirm. When she asked for a secondary pass from standby systems, he paused. The answer came slower that time. No more sweeps tonight. Tag it if you want, but that's the end of it. Elise didn't argue. She closed the channel. The hum in the cabin sounded louder now, not because the ship had changed, but because her certainty had. She reached into the lower drawer beneath her console and pulled out her laminated drift chart. It unfolded into soft creases across her lap. She placed her logbook on one corner to keep it still. The chart was printed before the exercise began, overlaid with her own marks and weather notations. In pencil, near the western boundary, a handwritten note circled a commercial shipping lane that had been shut down 2 days earlier. Dangerous crosswinds. Unpredictable current. She had highlighted it on the first night of the operation, more out of habit than directive. She placed her finger at the edge of that lane and traced the projected drift vector forward. The signal she had seen aligned just off that path. Not perfect, but close. Close enough for something adrift. Close enough for someone. She drew a small circle over the point, then a thinner line backward, tracing where it might have started. The math made sense. The water temperature did too. Her gut told her it was real, not dramatic, not certain, just quietly real. The systems panel blinked once behind her. The diagnostic timer had finished. Shutdown cycle would begin in minutes. Elise refolded the chart, tucked it under her arm, and rose from her station. Her boots hit the deck gently. She walked the length of the cabin without looking back. In the companionway, voices floated up from below deck. Someone had a speaker tucked near the hangar ladder, music playing faintly through the bulkhead. Laughter followed. She moved past it without breaking stride, keyed herself into the secondary systems room, and waited for the screen to warm. There. She reopened the radar record. She pulled the saved flare contact and reclassified it under a new label drift anomaly. That way, it wouldn't be flagged for deletion. It would just wait. She attached her initials and saved the entry. No one would notice it tonight, but it would stay logged. Elise sat in the dim light for a while longer. Her eyes didn't move from the screen. The contact blinked once before fading into the background. She stayed until it was gone. Then she logged out. The watch floor had softened into low light and half-heard conversations. Most of the displays were in idle mode now, cycling through weather sweeps and archived data sets. Overhead, the shift change lights flicked from amber to green. Elise stood near the operations console, her logbook tucked tight under one arm, the edge of its cover worn from years of handling. The screen in front of her glowed with a single tagged contact. No label. No alert, just a timestamp and location. She had entered it an hour earlier and was still staring at it. The ambient noise in the room had changed. Officers clustered near the debrief kiosks, laughing about call signs and intercept footage, the day's missions already collapsing into stories. One of the radar techs leaned back in his chair, half listening to a broadcast replay. The big screens had shifted to looped highlight reels, fighters in afterburn, refueling formations, tight barrel rolls caught from helmet cams, no E2 footage. The Hawkeye rarely made the recap feed. Elise refreshed the radar log and cross-checked the contact again. Its profile hadn't changed. The thermal spike had lasted under 8 seconds, but its decay matched analog burn signatures. Not explosive, not a weapons test, just heat human. Probably. The data didn't scream for attention, it whispered. That made it easier to ignore. She loaded her annotated heat overlay into the console and layered it onto the naval chart. It was an older map, scanned by hand, covered in her pencil notes and personal drift estimates. When the transparency resolved, the flare contact sat neatly along the edge of a storm-closed shipping lane. She traced its path with her fingertip, measuring against the weather vector logged 48 hours earlier. It held. Just barely. But it held. A commander from operations walked by and slowed as he caught sight of the screen. He was clean-cut, fast-moving, and always perfectly calibrated to authority. He frowned slightly and gestured at the monitor. "You still tracking that false ping?" Elise kept her voice even. "It fits a handheld flare signature. Analog. Matches a drift pattern from the storm corridor." He tilted his head, unimpressed. "Old sim flare. Most likely. They dumped a dozen test canisters into that zone last week. The system scrubbed the log." She asked if a confirmation sweep had been approved. He gave a small laugh and tapped the edge of the console. "Exercise is over. No second passes on soft targets. Tag it and rotate off. Lantern. Let the system do its job." She nodded without expression. As he walked away, she turned back to the console. Her hand hovered over the delete command, then shifted. Instead, she reclassified the contact under a maintenance review tag drift legacy. No priority flag. That would bury it deep, but not erase it. Anyone scanning the back end would still find it. If they looked. The screen dimmed slightly as the idle timer kicked in. Her overlay faded out. Elise saved her input, then removed her logbook from the reader tray and tucked it into her vest. Out in the passageway, footsteps echoed faintly over the steel grating. Officers passed her without slowing. Near the far end, a media crew was packing up gear. Someone was posing for a photo beside a flight helmet display. The Hawkeye was not included in the background. Elise stepped through the hatch and into the quieter hallway beyond. She walked without rush, her expression unreadable. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't disobeyed. But she hadn't let it die either. The flight deck was nearly empty. Most of the fighters were under tarp, canopies latched, tie-downs humming in the wind. Steam from the catapults drifted low and thin, curling past the island tower where a few watchstanders kept motionless vigil. Dusk had turned to full night, and the carrier lights threw long strips of red and green across the deck. A helicopter sat idle in the recovery zone, its rotors tied. The atmosphere had shifted, loud in its silence. All noise, no presence. Elise crossed the deck slowly, gloves clipped to her belt, badge secured at her vest pocket. The wind pulled at her flight suit as she moved between rows of quiet aircraft. She carried no bag, no kit, just the laminated folder tucked under her arm and the certainty she'd not been able to shake for the last 5 hours. The Hawkeye waited near Spot 8, scheduled for a late maintenance verification flight. No mission load, no expectation of anything. Just systems testing under low visibility conditions. She wasn't listed on the manifest, but her name still hung in the maintenance logs from earlier. No one stopped her. Inside the aircraft, the glow of cockpit instruments cast long shadows across the cabin. The pilot in the left seat moved through the startup checklist in a slow, practiced rhythm. His voice was low, steady. One of the techs adjusted a floor panel under the radar bay. The other leaned against the bulkhead, sipping from a dented metal thermos. Elise stepped inside without a word. She gave a quiet nod, took her place at the radar console, and began the warm-up sequence. No one asked why she was there. No one questioned her clearance. The rotors began to spin with a low mechanical moan. Power came online in slow waves. Her console booted one system at a time: navigation alignment, passive scan, electro-optical lens calibration. She adjusted her headset, keyed her login, and waited for the alignment to settle. The pilot looked back once and asked if she wanted to test a westward calibration route. She said yes. Airborne. The Hawkeye leveled into a holding pattern just past the 100.0 nautical mile boundary. The sky was pitch black, no stars, just a high overcast and a low ceiling. The radar feed streamed across her screen in rhythmic arcs. The system ran clean. No tagged returns. The pilot and tech spoke quietly about landing gear pressure and backup GPS lag. Elise sat forward. She initiated her manual sweep override. The system accepted the input without alarm. Her overlay map loaded from internal storage, bypassing the central net. Within one full sweep rotation, the contact reappeared. It was faint, but it had moved again, drifted southwest, barely a nautical mile from the previous point. The pulse was weaker than before, but intact, a long decay flare, analog, manual, no beacon, no tag, but real. She adjusted the gain, narrowed the sweep window, and locked the coordinates. The system blinked once. Still there. She requested a 2-degree heading correction. The pilot glanced over his shoulder and asked if it was for verification. She nodded, just checking radar stability across a wind shear edge. He shrugged. Minor adjustment. Well within the test pattern. The aircraft banked left, easing into a new alignment. Elise scanned again. The contact solidified. Still irregular, still analog, no signature recognition, but its shape held. She layered the infrared feed from the EO turret. The screen lit up with faint thermal contrast oval structure, clustered heat pocket, moving just slightly with each pass. A raft. She didn't say it aloud. Her fingers gripped the console edge. She reached for her overlay archive, lined it up manually with the drift path, and ran the storm vector backward. The result converged on a corridor she had flagged days earlier. Closed shipping traffic. No transponders allowed. High sea warning. She had marked it herself on day 1 of the exercise. Her heart beat once, slow and sharp. She tagged the contact, named it Lantern 1. The pilot asked what she had. She kept her voice level. Unconfirmed surface object, possibly flare debris, sending a passive check. She routed the coordinates through a diagnostic line, not SAR, not alert priority, just a low-profile systems handoff. They circled again. Elise watched the signal hold. The second tech looked over, chasing a ghost. Lantern. She didn't answer. The radar blinked again, then stabilized. The carrier responded 3 minutes later. Message received. Possible anomaly. No further action at this time. That was enough. She updated the log, time, signal shape, drift velocity, bearing, cross-confirmed with EO overlay and rangefinder. A single handwritten note beside the entry read, manual flare shape confirmed. No digital distress signal present. They stayed airborne for another 12 minutes. No one else asked what she was doing. No one else saw the contact, but it stayed, locked on her screen, slowly drifting. The return never spiked, never screamed, but it never faded. As they turned inbound for the carrier, the pilot gave a light laugh. Well, that was more interesting than usual. Elise said nothing. She powered down her station, secured her seat harness, and waited until the skids touched the deck. When the cabin lights switched to standby, she rose, removed her headset, and moved toward the rear hatch. Outside, the wind had picked up. Deck crew walked slowly through shadow, adjusting straps, resetting cones. No one waited for her. No one asked what she'd seen. She descended the ramp, boots steady on the wet metal, and walked back across the deck with the logbook under her arm. The signal was still there. She had seen it. That was enough. Night held everything in silence. The sea below stretched out in shadow, endless and flat, broken only by the faintest reflection of starlight where the overcast thinned. The Hawkeye moved through the air with a steady, low hum, its rotors slicing evenly in rhythm. Inside the cabin, there was only the sound of systems running, fans circulating, and the occasional shift of a seat harness. Elise sat upright at her console. Her gloves were clipped to her belt, headset angled across one ear, the other exposed to catch any sound from the flight crew. She moved through the radar suite manually. The automated search parameters were still running in background mode, but she had already overridden them. Too many filters, too many thresholds for what counted as real. She had narrowed the gain, slowed the sweep, allowed noise. Inside the noise, she found the signal again. Low elevation, no ID, no beacon, but consistent movement. She keyed the 3-dimensional tracking overlay. The contact was drifting southwest at a measured rate, just above sea state. The heat return was faint, untagged, analog. It had shape, but no structure the radar could resolve. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't metal. It moved with the wind, not through it. That mattered. She overlaid weather conditions from the last 48 hours. Wind shear matched. Drift alignment made sense. There was no electromagnetic tag to pull. It was invisible to every automated system still watching. But her eyes didn't need those tags. She switched over to the EO turret, slewed the camera toward the contact coordinates, and adjusted for horizon alignment. The image came in grainy, light-starved. She compensated for pitch wobble and refocused. The second frame revealed it. An object, dark, bobbing, oval-shaped, shallow profile, definitely not mechanical. She adjusted thermal contrast. The feed responded. Inside the floating shape, a soft glow. Two bodies. One of them raised an arm. She caught the motion, rewound, played again. This time, a flicker irregular, narrow, pulsing faintly. A flashlight. Her hands steadied on the console. She took a breath, locked the turret onto the object, and opened a secondary comm link. She routed it through the diagnostics relay. Not the main line. Less scrutiny. More control. This is Lantern. Confirmed contact at grid 248 by 07. Unpowered raft. 2 visible. 1 signaling. She waited. The pilot turned slightly but did not interrupt. The techs glanced over, then back at their stations. The reply came. Lantern. Confirm visual. She tapped the screen. Affirmative. EO return shows raft. Flashlight in motion. Both heat signatures consistent with human profiles. There was silence on the line for a moment. Then, rescue Seahawk rerouting. Stand by for triangulation. She acknowledged and returned to the feed. The flashlight kept moving. Weak, but deliberate. The signal pulsed with the roll of the sea. A minute later, the Seahawk appeared on her radar. She tagged its transponder manually. Distance closing. Heading clean. The wind picked up slightly. She adjusted the EO angle to keep the raft centered in the frame. One of the figures had collapsed inward. The other held the flashlight up with effort, its beam flickering sideways, not forward. The Seahawk reported visual contact at a range of 3 nautical miles. A searchlight came down, slicing across the ocean. It swept once, then locked on. The raft lit up in high-contrast bloom. 2 people, one barely upright, one barely conscious. The Seahawk comms came through again. Carrier, visual confirmed. 2 survivors, life flare out. Beginning winch descent. Elise did not move. She updated her log. Coordinates, time, confirmation, visual relay. She opened the scanned copy of her original radar sketch and added the overlay from tonight's pass. The shapes matched. The signal location was almost exact. She recorded the motion vector, labeled the final contact Lantern 1. In the video feed, the Seahawk lowered its crew. A harness reached the raft. The flashlight fell, vanishing from view. The first survivor was lifted, then the second. The raft remained alone, half collapsed, drifting back into darkness. Elise watched until the IR signal faded below threshold. The pilot broke the quiet. That was from the drift anomaly, the one you flagged. She nodded. It never disappeared, just slipped past auto-sort. One of the techs leaned back slowly. That's not luck. She didn't respond. She closed the turret feed and saved the final imagery. Her fingers paused on the screen. Then she added one final note to the mission log. Manual override required for recovery. Contact detected outside protocol filters. Visual lock initiated by operator judgment. The cabin settled into quiet again. The instruments blinked at low intervals. The Hawkeye remained in holding pattern for a few more minutes, then turned north on return vector. The ocean below was still black, still endless. But somewhere behind them, 2 lives had come up out of it. Elise leaned back, her body stiff from tension, her focus still narrowed like a string pulled tight. She had not shouted. She had not demanded. She had simply watched, then acted. The Seahawk was inbound. The survivors would be processed. Their story would begin again. No one would know what nearly erased them, what nearly filtered them out as noise. But Elise would remember. The signal had been dim, low resolution, out of spec, but she had seen it, and that had been enough. The operations floor had gone still. Screens lined the forward wall, each replaying the final moments of the rescue. The Seahawk's infrared feed showed the raft under spotlight tilted, partially deflated, bobbing in the black water. The winch cable extended downward, vibrating slightly with each pull of wind. 2 crew members moved with practiced speed, securing harnesses. One of the survivors raised an arm. The other did not move at all. The lift began. The feed faded to black. Along the rear wall, a thermal overlay flickered. It replayed again. A faint bloom of heat, shifting with the waves, shrinking frame by frame. The last flare had expired by the time the Seahawk arrived. Only the flashlight remained. Just enough light to be seen. No one spoke. Around the consoles, Officers stood watching. A few leaned in closer. The usual end-of-shift chatter had vanished. The atmosphere in the room had shifted into something quiet and heavy, something rarely named. Stillness was the only sound. One of the senior air controllers broke the silence. "Where'd we get the vector?" A systems operator turned from her console and answered without fanfare. "Lantern tagged it." There were no follow-up jokes, no comments. The name had weight now. It was printed in the transcript scrolling live on the mission monitor. Call sign Lantern, origin E2D airborne operations, status vector source, method manual radar override with verified EO confirmation. At the central command station, the admiral stood motionless. Then he spoke with quiet precision. "Who authorized her to fly tonight?" The answer came from the watch floor supervisor, his voice low but steady. "She didn't wait to be..." No one corrected him. At that moment, the main hatch opened. Elise stepped into the room. Flight vest unzipped halfway, headset hanging around her neck, logbook pressed under one arm. Her boots left damp outlines across the polished deck, and her braid had come loose in the back. Strands of hair stuck to her neck from dried sweat. She didn't look for anyone. She didn't hesitate. She crossed the operations floor slowly, her expression calm, her shoulders relaxed. Her presence was not loud, but it carried. Conversations didn't restart. Screens didn't change. She walked straight through the middle of the room, past consoles and command terminals, without comment or pause. Two officers at the briefing table stepped aside slightly as she approached, not dramatically, just enough to make room. At the master display, the SAR event log updated again. The final line read clearly. "Rescue confirmed, vector source Lantern." No rank, no detail, but there was no doubt. She stopped in front of the mission monitor, opened her logbook to the page she had marked by hand earlier in the week, and set it down on the edge of the debrief counter. The original sketch signal shape. Pulse decay. Wind vector matched the rescue site coordinates. One of the junior flight analysts glanced at the page, then back at the screen. "That was you," she said. Elise gave a single nod. The analyst stepped away without another word, gaze fixed on the data stream behind her. On one of the side monitors, the footage looped again. The Seahawk, the drop, the arm raised, the final signal. A quiet voice near the back spoke again. "We wouldn't have found them." No one disagreed. The public affairs team, who had been preparing a visual reel for the morning briefing, stood beside a paused file window. It showed a fighter banking against a golden sky, the sun perfectly lit behind its canopy. The file remained closed. No one moved to open it. Elise remained at the counter a moment longer. She removed her headset and clipped it to her vest. Then she reached for her logbook, closed it slowly, and held it at her side. She didn't speak. She didn't explain. She turned from the screens, walked past the command table again, and moved toward the exit. This time, the shift lead turned slightly as she passed. He didn't say anything. He just gave a nod. Outside the operations bay, the corridor lights were dim. The hum of machinery returned. Someone was restocking thermal tape into a wall locker. Another crew member paused, recognized her, and straightened. She said nothing, just kept walking. Back inside, the final replay continued. Winch descent, signal flicker, shape recovered. This time, no one looked away. Sometimes the difference between being overlooked and being irreplaceable is only visible in hindsight. Elise never raised her voice, never asked for permission, and never stepped outside the rules. She simply refused to ignore what others dismissed. In a world driven by speed, noise, and hierarchy, her power was patience, precision, and the courage to act when no one was watching. She did not seek recognition, but her quiet vigilance saved lives and earned a place no one could deny. Her story is a reminder that true strength often moves in silence, and that doing the right thing rarely begins with applause. What does this story mean to you? Have you ever seen someone rise in a moment no one else noticed? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, consider following for more quiet, Powerful moments of service and human resolve.